Order. Good morning, and welcome to the Select Committee for Science, Innovation and Technologies pre-appointment hearing for Innovate UK's preferred candidate. And I would like to start by welcoming Tom Adeyoola to this morning's session. I'm going to begin with a really open question, Tom. Why did you apply for this role, and what would you bring to it?
So I've spent pretty much all of my career working in startups and innovation. It's been the key driving force for me. I'm completely driven by understanding systems and how to improve them. I worked for 5 startups across sport, telco, film, gaming, before eventually starting my own in the fashion technology space, which revolved around cutting-edge computer vision and machine learning technology, which I found at Cambridge University. I exited the business in 2019 and then embarked on, if you like, a portfolio career of trying to basically improve what I saw as the friction points in the current innovation ecosystem. Along with investing in some startups, mentoring, advising, etc. That led me to push on pension reform, which brought me to working on the startup review for Rachel Reeves, and was potentially a catalyst for the Mansion House Compact work, and also with reference to how to potentially speed up the flow and volume of IP out of universities based on my experience of working with Cambridge University. So looking then in a year ago at my next move, I was asked whether I would consider applying for this role, and given that I'd been spending most of my career in innovation, and my understanding and desire to improve systems, the role of Exec Chair of Innovate UK felt like the biggest possible lever on the innovation ecosystem that I could potentially have the honour of working on. I spent a little bit of time trying to understand. I've worked outside the system trying to impact on it and improve it. And certainly at my panel interview, Ottiline said that working within a system is where you can have the most impact. So that's essentially why I'm here today. I'm hoping that I can have a positive impact to ensure that the innovation ecosystem, once I've ended my stewardship of Innovate UK, is a better one than I left it in 2019 when I sold my business.
Thank you very much, Tom. And you and I have met before and worked together before, but for this session, I read your CV, and it is very, very impressive. I also read some of your interviews with you, and it's clear that you have your work has spanned a huge variety of different startups. You've gone from startup to startup. You've built large organizations as well with Metail. But the cultures of the innovation ecosystem and UKRI, both as a public body and as a largely academic body, are very different. So what challenges do you foresee in going from that startup, a very successful startup and entrepreneurial career, into leading a very large public sector organisation?
I'm someone with a bias for action, so in terms of making things happen. And that is the beauty of working in startups, where it's a case of you have 1,000,001 challenges, and it's basically your ability to knock them over as quickly as can, which will determine your potential for success. Now, admittedly, in terms of big government organisation, there's the potential that it might not move at the pace that I would like it to, shall we say.
Yes.
But I think, the thing that I've certainly learned over the last 5 years in terms of my portfolio and not running directly a business is I've learned the ability to influence and move and make things happen where I didn't own all of the resources.
Right.
So, you know, the power of basically influence around the board table, the ability to find and build consensus among people to basically generate action, I think is key and important. But also in terms of how I like to think about things, I enjoy people, I enjoy culture, and I enjoy sort of having an impact on a system to improve efficacy. And I think the role of a CEO, the role of a leader, is about setting out clarity of strategy and vision, and then basically one of service in removing the obstacles for then the people within the organisation to perform. So from my perspective, in terms of looking at Innovate UK, I see that as being a key part of my duty. So how can I basically simplify and clarify purpose and strategy? Because in terms of every time I've met an individual from Innovate UK, these are hugely passionate and driven people. I wouldn't say they're any less passionate and driven about improving the ecosystem than me. So hence it's about what are the structures in place to enable them to deliver. And I think I am here to ensure that Innovate UK can deliver for the UK nation and the UK people in terms of driving long-term productivity for the economy and ultimately the goal of economic growth in the long run.
Thank you. And we are, I think, all well aware of the importance of the government's mission for growth and the way in which the government has embraced innovation as a driver of growth. So the role of Innovate UK is absolutely critical to that. And we will come to, examine that a bit more later on. But just for the moment, sort of focusing on you and your background, it's a fantastic, again, tech background, and we certainly need more of that kind of experience in the public sector, and Innovate UK needs to be able to attract more others with, a tech background. But I note that the salary for your role is, I think, £215,000 plus bonus. The salary of an entry-level Google AI engineer is £150,000 and £270,000 for a senior AI engineer. How will you, or how do you intend to attract others with a great tech background into the public sector, and what do you think are some of the challenges around that?
I think a key thing for me is this sense of public service and doing a tour of duty. So I've always felt that was something that I wanted to do at some point in my career, and I think actually it's been quite encouraging to see several other entrepreneurs of my generation doing the same. So Ian Hogarth was my generation. Yes. He ran Songkick while I was running Metail, and similarly with Matt Clifford. So I think this sense of wanting to do a tour of duty and make impact is there amongst many of my era. I think the key thing then is creating the environment that will enable people to feel like they can flourish and have impact when they come into an organisation. And I think allowing for this ability to come in for 2 years, 3 years, time limited, in and out the other side. And I back myself in terms of my ability to encourage people to come and work for me for much reduced salaries. When I was a startup founder at Metail, I was playing that exact game versus Google. So I co-funded PhD students at Cambridge University, so they started working on my problem field, and that meant that they ended up coming to work for me instead of basically going for 3 times more cash to go and work for a Google or an Apple and so on. So I ended up with 13 PhDs in that team, all who could have earned 3 times more somewhere else. So I think that sense of being very clear on purpose, very clear on the ability for people to have impact, and very clear about the time frame you're trying to bring someone in to have that impact should be the type of thing that can encourage talent to come into the public service and do their tour of duty before potentially going back out into the private sector.
Oh, thank you. And indeed, the committee, I think, we heard as part of our Digital Centre of Government inquiry of the role that a tour of duty approach could play in bringing private sector tech talent into the public sector to enable digital transformation, and indeed, in the case of Innovate UK, drive innovation. And one of our committee members with significant experience with Innovate UK is obviously the previous prior Science Minister, George Freeman. I'd like to bring you in here.
Thanks, Chief. Tom, nice to see you. Congratulations. In the later session, we're going to talk a bit about Innovate as a system and your sort of perspective on how it needs to change. But I'm interested just in terms of the interview process and the bonus as well, how much you've been able to shape a mission for change. And when I was Minister, I was trying to establish a process where key appointments like this have a chance to set these are the 3 or 4 things we need to do. So I'm just wondering, have you had that conversation with ministers and...
So I would say that
Ian,
from the beginning, my query all the way through was, but I'm a startup guy. Is that really what you want? So, do you just like the idea of a startup guy, or is there really going to be a mandate for change? And hence, a key important part for me during the process was who's the minister, and who is going to be the new UKRI CEO, and were our views aligned? And if our views weren't going to be aligned, then there was no way this was going to work. And I feel pretty confident that Ian, in terms of coming in from the brief conversations I've had with him, is very much the pragmatic, forward-thinking person that I am, in terms of basically looking to have and move the organisation from being very much input-focused to outcome-focused.
Yeah. Knowing Ian and Patrick well, I completely agree. I suppose what I'm asking is a big moment when you sign, pre-appointment hearing. Are you comfortable that you've agreed with Patrick and Ian the changes that you believe the system needs to see, and that they agree, so the 3 of you are on the same ticket? Because my experience of coming in from business to politics is that's the key, really, as long as you get alignment. Have you got that alignment, or is today for you part of that?
I believe I have that alignment, but obviously this is now the world of politics, which is slightly different to what I'm used to. So, and things can change, right? So as they have changed dramatically over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
So I will have to feel comfortable, and I do feel comfortable in myself, that given the parameters that I've been set and given the world as it is today, that I believe that I have that mandate.
Great. The point I was making really is the appointments process used to be very slow, probably still is.
Yes.
My feeling as Minister was, look, at the beginning, all we need to do is agree what this organisation needs. 3, 4, 5 things. Is it in stable mode? Is it in reform mode? Agree that, write it down, and then make sure that the leader we're appointing shares that view. And I'm just wondering, my advice to you would be to get it in writing.
Thanks very much, George. Adam.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, Tom. Thanks for joining us. So, looking at the term that you are potentially signing up for here, you've said, I understand already, that you wouldn't seek reappointment at the end of the term. Why is that?
I think exactly as I said earlier, for me, this is a tour of duty. Yeah. So it's about being able to basically go at the problem without any sense of fear or favour, and exactly to George's point, do I have a mandate which I can basically attack and basically deal with that? I don't want to be in a position where, come the last 2 years, the focus is all about reappointment and doing all of the things that are required to get reappointed. I believe that I want to be here to move the organisation from one point to another point, and with every engagement that I take on outside of Innovate UK, and that I have done in the past, it's always been about, what do you want to do as an organisation? Is there a clarity of going from an A to a B? And if so, then I want to be part of that. And once the B is achieved, then I go and move on to something else. Because each of these things are about, there's a system, it needs a movement in it to improve it. And if I can do that, then that's the end of that basically strategic engagement.
Cool. Thanks, Tom. And you talk about moving from A to B. It's clear you're setting goals for this sort of 4-year term. How are you going to make sure you meet those goals, reach that B point, and then what happens if you don't do that by the end of the term?
So I think the key thing at the moment is I think the organisation is extremely input obsessed and not outcome focused.
Yeah.
So exactly that point about are there metrics in place to know what is good and what isn't good? I'm not sure they are there. So the starting position is how can I set those metrics to understand what is the impact Innovate UK is having? What is the economic model by which you can evaluate future projects to basically set a sense of success criteria on project success? Are you moving the needle in terms of moving impact from where it is today to improvement? And are you basically increasing the speed and efficiency of how you're delivering those things? And then finally, what do stakeholders, both internal and external, think about the organisation? Has their view of the organisation improved? So there's sort of the 5 key areas that I want to baseline in that first year and basically ensure that we're in a position to be able to understand on a as close to real-time basis going forward our impact. We should be looking at cohorts. We should be understanding where things are successful or not. Because I fundamentally believe that the difference between good organisations and bad organisations isn't their ability to generate good ideas. All organisations have good ideas. It's the ability to kill bad ones, which is the difference, so that you can focus your time and energy on the good ones. And to be able to do that, you need to be able to basically monitor and evaluate as close to real time as possible.
Great, thanks, Tom. Yeah, that's really interesting. Moving on to look at impartiality and independence of this role, very important as part of the role that we're looking at here. Your CV, as we've heard already, is very impressive, and you've got quite a lot of different interests and a lot of broad areas that you're involved in. Do you foresee any conflicts of interest, particularly in relation to some of your other roles? I understand you've got a position on the Channel 4 board. Any conflicts of interest that you might foresee as part of this?
I've basically sort of stood down from most of my projects, leaving Channel 4 in play and my school governorship board. I think there's one which I'm still exiting of. Another of my non-profits successfully merged it with another organisation yesterday, so that's moved off. So yeah, I think Channel 4 has one project where it's in a consortium with a few other companies on AI, which has a bit of Innovate UK funding. That's the only thing which sort of crosses over in this space, and as a non-executive, I haven't been involved, and I wouldn't be involved in any of that decision-making. And likewise, I would recuse myself from any decision-making which connected. So in the same way that other board members currently do the same, where there are any decisions or crossovers that could potentially cause conflict.
Great, thanks, Tom. And then last question for me. The head of the Innovate UK board is broadly considered independent from government. How important do you think that independence is, and how would you ensure in the role that independence is maintained?
I think going back to the point about having a clear mandate. So in some respects, we operate at the pleasure of the UK people and the UK government, but we should have a clear mandate and independence to basically operate within those parameters. So in terms of doing the work, making the work happen. I'm a fiercely independent individual. Once I'm working with an organisation, I'm fiercely loyal to that organisation, and I have no problems speaking truth to power, if you like, or having robust conversations about where I think the lines are and how an organisation should operate. So from that point of view, having frank and clear means of engagement is something that I would basically be insisting on throughout the process, and I would hope that that would be the position in which I could work. But otherwise, as everybody all knows, there are if the organisation was pushed in a way which I felt brought either my position or the organisation into disrepute, then there are means by which you then walk away from that organisation if you can't move forward. But I wouldn't expect that to happen.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Adam. Kit, can I bring you now?
Thanks very much. I'm sorry I have to leave shortly, but I just wanted to ask then on that line, during the recruitment process, did you seek or receive any reassurances from the government about budget for the organisation, given that money is tight, either directly for the organisation or for the wider kind of science and innovation ecosystem?
Short answer, no, I didn't.
Right, so you have no expectation of what the budget for Innovate UK is going to do over the next couple of years?
No, I mean, all I've seen is the commitment that was made this week, which again is record levels of funding for innovation through UKRI. That commitment that was made. Now, naturally, we have seen the reports of review into ALBs, but at the same time, there has been the commitment which I've seen, read about from Peter Kyle, to research and innovation being a key pillar of the growth agenda. So I would expect that to continue.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. You talked about record commitment, record levels of funding for Innovate UK, but I believe Innovate
UKRI.
UKRI. Okay, yes. I think.
Can I come in on that? Because that's a very interesting point you've made twice. On the jungle drums out there is talk of just rumour, gossip, that maybe Innovate might be abolished and folded into UKRI, so its function across the UKRI mothership, as it were, as opposed to being a freestanding organisation. And I'm just wondering if your reference to within UKRI twice is a sign that you think that is in play, or whether you want to take this opportunity to say, no, Innovate UK is here to stay. Its role may change, but it's here to stay.
I believe that Innovate UK's role is here to stay. I'm taking the role because that's what I'm here to do, and in particular to deliver. So I have nothing that's come my way which has suggested otherwise. And in terms of my conversation with Patrick, he has very clearly suggested that in terms of what I want to do in terms of driving the organisation and the ability for Innovate to work in different ways to the rest of the organisation, they are fine and clear. Like, the organisations need to work to deliver, and I think that's the key thing for me, is that we need to operate in a way which is going to deliver on our mandate and our purpose.
Thank you, Tom. Just on that, you talked about talking truth to power and about your loyalty, and those are two great qualities. So, if the Secretary of State Peter Kyle did come to you demanding 5 or 10 or a percentage of cuts to Innovate UK, how would you react? We,
as Innovate UK, are not immune to the constraints from an economic perspective that we're now currently seeing across the UK economy. I think my role is to make sure that I can basically deliver the best case that shows that money spent through Innovate UK delivers the biggest impact on the economy it can. Now, with reference to that point of an organisation which is input obsessed and is basically purely focused on how it delivers money out into the ecosystem but doesn't understand its impact, is an organisation which can be at risk of reducing its funds without having an argument for maintenance. Now, it's, I believe, my responsibility to try and establish as quickly as possible the impact on the organisation and the ability for the organisation to grow that impact in order to maintain its share of budgets, or in fact improve its share of budgets.
Sounds rather like you're going to treat Innovate UK as a bit of a startup and the government as a key investor in it, and you want to be able to show what your results will be, which I think is a good argument. Let's move on now to talk more about the organisation itself, and I'll ask Steve to kick us off.
Thanks very much, Tom. I think this probably leads quite nicely actually into this question. So you've said previously that it's quite difficult to understand what Innovate UK is for, or certainly how it's operating now, and that there's some confusion. I think when I talk to some startups, they might complain that originally it was meant to be quite fast moving, supporting sort of cutting edge science and getting in there quite quickly. In fact, in reality, what they've discovered is it's now quite slow moving. It's a grant making process. It's a long process, sort of 9 to 12 months to get grants out of it. So, where do you think the confusion lies in the organisation, and how would you go about changing it?
I would say, like, when I started Metail back in 2008, getting an Innovate UK grant was a real badge of honour. The DD process was tough, but off the back of that, you had the sense that people viewed you differently, and you were doing real innovation, and as a consequence, it was a real help in order to access funding and gain funding from other sources. But the ecosystem back then and the number of companies back then was much smaller. Right? So the ecosystem has grown hugely since in the last 10, 15 years. So there's way more companies. Technology has expanded in many different areas. So the complexity of what you're trying to judge and try to understand has grown also pretty much exponentially. So as a consequence, it's a much more complicated system. The system is trying to do a lot more and deliver money into loads more different areas. And as a consequence, I think the message of and the purpose and the singular focus has got a bit blurry. So I would agree. I think it needs to move from that purpose, which is it's trying to get money and distribute money as quickly as possible. And even when it's looking at the percentages of grants allocations that it does deliver, because the number of people applying for grants is growing, you're getting a growing disconnect in terms of the number of people who are applying for grants and then failing to get them. So even if the percentage is growing, the absolute number is also continuing to grow. So there needs to be a greater clarification of purpose, what it's there for, the types of technologies it's delivering, and in terms of this new government with missions, with sector focus, with science and technology, 5 critical technologies, there is an opportunity to sort of really sort of clarify the areas that the organisation is going to focus on and the types of innovation that it's going to deliver against, and make sure that messaging is clear at a company level so that people know what the process they're going through, at the time it's going to take, and what good looks like. I think at the moment it's very difficult to understand what good looks like, what will happen as you go through a process, the amount of time you need to give to your opportunity for a positive outcome. And as a consequence, the expectations have grown wildly, and there's a huge cohort of people, therefore, who have a negative engagement with the organisation. Mm-hmm. I think it needs to flip the other side. We need to be very company focused. We need to tell better stories of success. The companies have gone through what success looked like. This is what you need to be doing. This is what you need to look like to generate success. And we need to be very clear about your likelihood of failure through the process. But also in the process, I think the application process is extremely complicated. It's very long, and it sort of skews towards being good at filling out the grant process rather than the type of business you are. And if I could tilt that, I think that would be a good thing, because I think you can get people who wouldn't necessarily be able to generate a good business, but they know how to write it, who can get money, versus people who are going to create an effective business not getting the money. So that is currently biased in the wrong direction for me.
Thank you. And then in terms of regional growth, you talked about missions and mission-led government. That's all good, and sort of the alignment there. But in terms of rebalancing the economy, you've got quite a lot of experience in the sort of Golden Triangle sort of area. But obviously, there's quite a lot of innovation that goes on across the country, and there's not much money that goes in to support those startups across the rest of the country. We've heard from Northern Gritstone previously. If you look at the southwest, look at the northwest. There's a lot going on there, and but the money doesn't necessarily follow into the regions. What do you think the organisation's role is in supporting innovation outside of the Golden Triangle?
I mean, I'm a strong believer in clusters and trying to understand the interventions that are needed at each level to generate and get clusters going. So when I started, even Metail back in 2008, the London cluster of tech startups was very small. There was a monthly coffee morning where there might be 10 to 15 people who would turn up at the cafe at the top of Waterstones in Piccadilly. That's how small it was then. But it's a flywheel, so you need to basically get the flywheel going, and then it starts to generate compounding benefits as you move on. I've spent the last 18 months actually visiting a lot of clusters around the country. So I've been down to visit Science Creates in Bristol and understanding the work that Harry Desdecroix's done there in moving Bristol from 20th in the spin-out rankings to 4th in 5 years. And that's part of the uncomfortable truth, is to get the flywheel going. There are one or two key individuals that start to move the needle. Been to Liverpool to try and understand what are the ingredients that are missing there about how to generate that, and actually talk to startups there. They will say the missing ingredient in Liverpool is there aren't enough angels, there's not enough angel groups to get that going. I gave a keynote speech in Doncaster for Tech's South Yorkshire just a couple of months ago. That is an emergent cluster where you can see that 5 years ago, for an investor coming from London, it's only 90 minutes by train. You wouldn't be able to guarantee that you could see 10 businesses, whereas now they've done the work, you can see the growth. There's very strong clarity that you could go up there as an investor and see 10 good businesses in a day and come back. So the concept of front dooring and basically linking and having connective tissue in the region starts to make sense. Similarly, I've been up to, and I spoke at the launch of the Northern Creative Corridor. I think as a cluster that's stretching it a little bit too much for me, because I think they're trying to say that cluster goes from Liverpool to Newcastle. I'm not sure the transport
certainly doesn't
would say that works. I think you do have to be sensible and understand the differences. I also talked to DCMS, and they would say there are 70 creative clusters. I don't think there are. So for me, I think it's about, again, how do you kick off these flywheels? How can you take away friction and make stuff happen? And when I try and think about innovation and the ecosystem, if you like, the ecosystem splits into three parts. There's the invention phase, where you're trying to generate some form of new technology, right? So, and our universities are great places to do that. So hence you might see clusters that generate around universities. And I took part in the work around Sister for Manchester in terms of building up that innovation district. Then you have the innovation phase, right? And the innovation phase is essentially looking at a system or a product package, and you're looking at, there's a new piece of technology or a new method or a new business model that can generate better, faster, cheaper outcome, right? That's the innovation bit. So the innovation is using that original invention phase, invention of new business model, technology or method, to generate something that's better, faster and cheaper. After that then comes the commercialization phase. So you can do the innovation bit and still not have the massive positive outcome because you're not doing the acceleration into the commercialization bit. So for me, the innovation part is like, how can we take stuff and increase the surface area for innovators to emerge so that there's more chances of success through to the commercialization phase. And we need to be sure that we can understand what's happening as businesses are following through around the country and what are the different interventions, and being able to provide that knowledge of information on the friction points that are preventing things from going as fast in West Country as they are in London, and the ingredients will be different. So the way I, if you like to think about it is the approach of where you see successes, you're trying to speed up the flywheel, like you're to make it go faster. Where you don't see successes, you're trying to understand what is the intervention here that's going to make success. And it might be that there are just some key ingredients missing, and therefore it needs a different type of intervention there.
Can I just before we move on, I'm fascinated by your tour of the of England. Was that as part of a different role, or was that part of your research for this role? That
was part of my own personal interest. So I would say that certainly in terms of running my own business, I'd thought that I'd spent a lot of time in London, and then I remember during COVID, I started to go to pitch events virtually in Northern Ireland and Wales. So it was like, well, I wouldn't have gone to Northern Ireland, to Belfast, but I can now through the power of Zoom. How can I get out and understand more about what's happening around the country? Because, especially in a post-Brexit world, when I was, living entrenched in London, it was a sense of like understanding what's going on. How can we basically ensure that opportunity is just distributed? And they were great places. So I've been up to Manchester several times. I've been to Birmingham, gave a talk in Birmingham, and met the people from Midland Mindforge there. I've been up to Gateshead a couple of times.
I'm impressed. The difference between Newcastle and Gateshead. So
you said you're all going to start bidding now. To Norwich.
Yes, I say your message is very welcome to this committee, and our inquiry into regional innovation and growth is very relevant to what you're talking about, and we welcome your movement around the country. But let's move on. And Steve, did you want to
I think George, did you want to comment on clusters?
Okay.
Tom, thank you. You've said some really interesting things I wanted to follow up. There are basically three questions. The first is about this question of where you see Innovate UK in the UK innovation ecosystem. And you've been quite clear about we need a stronger focus on outcomes. And you've said in the past you think it's pretty difficult for someone to know how to navigate. So I want to just ask where you see Innovate and where you are on the spectrum, because there are those who say it should be in the business of backing winners, taking UK companies, helping them accelerate into the global, and others who say, no, it should be more about sort of supporting innovation all around the country, and there are others who say, no, it should be embedded in the academic infrastructure at UKRI to help everyone be aware of what innovation is. So that they're slightly different, and I sense that Innovate over the years, as its former minister, has sort of tried to do all of the above. So I'm interested in that and the reforms you want to put in place. Secondly, doctrine. It's long seemed to me that we're stuck operating, and officials, leaders like you, are stuck in a doctrine of market failure, that the Treasury, since the 1980s, we've been saying we only intervene where there is proof of market failure, and we tie ourselves in knots filling in forms to demonstrate market failure. Isn't that completely old hat? Shouldn't we be backing winners and give you permission to pick not companies that can demonstrate market failure, but companies that can demonstrate success and support them? And then third question is on place and clusters. And Indro, your predecessor, did a lot of work trying to put place at the heart of Innovate, and I just wanted to come back and ask you how you see that work, if that's in the consolidation phase or if you think it needs a different approach.
So I would say that in terms of Innovate UK and my approach, I'm quite similar, if you like, and a model that I do like is the Sport England approach post Atlanta 96. So where we had one gold medal, and then 20 years later we were third in the medal table. So I think there's an element here which is it's two pronged. So your point about market failure, yes, I agree. It's about resolving market failure and understanding what that is, but being very, very clear and precise. So in the Sport England approach, for example, it would be the table tennis team, you're not going to have any money because you don't have a talented group of individuals at the moment. When the talented group of individuals appear, then you can move. So the focus needs to be upstream in terms of basically getting talented individuals out of schools to come through, and then we can start thinking about venues and facilities and so on and so forth. At the other end, I do believe that, like, if we're thinking about economic growth, we have to understand our global context, and champions do matter and scale does matter. And hence, when I'm looking at place as well, my point there is about, I think clusters matter because scale matters, and clusters matter because you need a whole bunch of companies to come together in an environment where you can therefore get liquidity of talent, knowledge transfer, and the ability to front door access to capital and access to markets. I think these things are really important. I do think we need to be improving the volume and speed of organisations that pass through our innovation ecosystem. So in terms of where Innovate UK sits, we should be all of the UKRI research councils in area, they're spotting research and inventions coming through. We should be very clearly there to catch them, expand the surface area, and basically accelerate them, catalyse them through to the commercial scale part. We should be very clear then on understanding who these companies are and what their conditions are for success and how they need to be supported in the next phase. And if there's anything that we should be basically delivering and be a superpower on by having UKRI, it is the knowledge of these companies and how they're flowing through. That knowledge is our and speed is the bit that we can basically have over others. So we should be able to know who they are, know what they look like, and basically prime them for investment that takes them through to commercial success. And at the moment, my big bugbear is that we are not creating the commercial giants from our IP that we should be. And part of that is not within my control, right? So the commercialization bit outside. So if I look at, I was an investor in LV, right? So it's one of only...
I get that point, but I just want to go back to the bit you are responsible for, will be responsible for. So I get the scale up and the city and all that, but just in Innovate, I think you've talked about speed.
Yep.
I'm just wondering what your sort of 1, 2, 3 change metrics are that internally you with your team are agreeing, I get it in writing, with ministers. These are the things that we're going to change. Can I just push you on that? I think you said speed.
Yeah.
What are the other things that you really want to be as a legacy for you as change?
So speed, I want to be able to understand the impact that the organisations are delivering as they pass through. So when we are not tracking the organisations and their impact and how they are delivering success beyond year one. And actually, we need to understand that it takes a while for innovation to basically deliver that success, and we should be tracking them for longer.
Impact metrics.
Yes.
Can I just intervene there? Is that also those who do not get funded from Innovate UK? So will you be tracking also the performance of those who don't?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
I think the key is we need to understand what the conditions of success are and conditions of failure, and be very clear about those.
Okay, so I've got speed, I've got impact metrics. I suppose what I'm probing is, you talked about the paperwork. In my experience, it's horrific, but it's largely because of this doctrine of market failure. The Treasury put conditions on money when they allocate it to DSIT. DSIT puts conditions on money when it allocates it to UKRI. UKRI put conditions on money when it allocates it to Innovate. There's this paperwork, a very slow approvals process, which is largely driven by, you've got to prove that you're using the money only for certain criteria that were agreed, which are basically market failure. And I'm wondering how, given your entrepreneurial sort of scrum half role, we want to take stuff out of the back of the scrum and spin it out wide and score a try for the UK, how you change that.
Well, that's my point of if we can get to a point where we can be clear that we understand the impact metrics, then we should be able to get to a point where we're able to basically reduce down the application part, because we're able to understand the surface area of the sort of companies that are coming through that we want, who can deliver the impact metrics.
Right. I think I'm hearing from that, which is very interesting, that a big metric for you would be, are we producing in the UK ecosystem enough companies that could scale up, subject to the city reforms and patch? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so that links to my third question, which is, if you could achieve that metric best, quickest, by focusing on the golden triangle, would you say, no, that isn't in itself enough sustainable? We've got to be nurturing the clusters around the country as well. And that's a tension in the system, isn't it? I'm keen to get your take.
That's a tension. I mean, currently today, 67% of Innovate UK money is spent outside of the Greater South East. I think it is understanding this notion of there are compounding effects to growing clusters, right? And the IP, and we have great universities that are generating IP and technology in spaces that we think are in the interest of the long-term future of the country. And we do have to make those bets as well, right? So there's the stuff which is later stage, but you also need to create your funnel, and that is going to be distributed around the country. So there are going to be places which are doing amazing stuff, which we're going to have to keep an eye on and make sure that that is growing at the rate that we want, with a flywheel that we want, so that it ends up being as successful and as big as the golden triangle successes. If we only focus at the stuff at the end and don't generate that pipeline, we end up with nothing.
Do I take from that one of your metrics would be growth of those genuinely world-class clusters, whether it's Manchester Materials or Glasgow Satellite, growth of them so that they start to produce scalable businesses as well?
When I'm looking at the clusters, when I'm thinking about the impact metrics as well, it's this sense of like, how quickly are these clusters growing in comparison to what we've seen before, and thinking about them on a cohort basis. And if they're not growing as quick, why aren't they growing? What's wrong with those conditions? And then what are the interventions that can be put in place?
Thank you.
Thanks very much, George. Now, Steve, come back to you and then we'll go to Alison.
Great, thank you. Just to final from me, just following on from that, what does it mean around sort of return on investment from UKRI? Where does that feature within your sort of thinking?
So, when I think about every pound that UK money is spent into the economy, I don't think we should be thinking any differently than top investors would be thinking about. So it's like, well, we should be having a 10x impact. That should be our focus on the economy. Like how can we deliver that? Why aren't we delivering that if we're not? So it's got to be that case that we are driving like outsized returns from the money that we're putting into the innovation ecosystem.
But that'll be spread across an entire sort of range.
Yeah,
so you've got to have some risk.
Exactly. And the Innovate UK has a big sum of money. It's making a lot of bets. So therefore you would expect across the ecosystem to be able to deliver accordingly.
And then what should the appetite for risk be within that as well?
I would say the appetite for risk has been, I would say, caution, because it's been focused on to the left, if you like, on distribution of money. I think at this moment in time, in this key moment where we're thinking about economic growth, where we're thinking about the missions, and where we're thinking about key sectors we want to drive, we are going to need to shift that dial a little bit. But shifting that risk dial is also related to return. In terms of UK culture, the bit that I've been disappointed with in how we think about it and report often is that we always think on costs and we don't relate risk to return at all. Yeah. Right? So it's, if we're talking about pension funds, we're talking about how much does it cost for the pension fund. We're not thinking about actually the return that we're trying to deliver to pension savers. And we have to understand that relationship, and we have to understand that if we want higher return, that comes with basically trying to understand and have clarity on the risk profile to deliver that.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Steve. On that last point, one of the challenges, it's very easy, relatively easy to measure costs. Measuring returns is particularly non-evident returns, such as spillover effects, can be challenging, and that's one of the reasons why we tend to concentrate on costs. How confident are you that as part of your metrics you can get a meaningful measure of returns, and how do you intend to go about that?
I think it's just something we have to do. I mean, I think if we're putting money into businesses, we should be able to track those businesses. So at a bottom line level, we should be able to know over 3 years those businesses generated this many more jobs, and actually they started to generate this amount of return and this amount of extra money invested in those businesses. So that sense of being able to track them, just as my organisation, non-profit organisation Extend Ventures, which had pretty much no resources, was able to basically look at 10 years worth of all venture funded businesses, who was in those businesses, what they were delivering and what they were returning, and understand an ROI of return across those businesses. So I think we have to basically start delivering on those sort of metrics, because those are the only metrics that you can look at if you want to try and understand the growth question. So at the moment, we are not well set up to understand the growth question. You need to be able to understand those metrics of what is happening to businesses that engage with and interact with Innovate UK with reference to the impact on growth.
That does. Thank you. That does not. That it's good that we have that. You're focused on that. Just to clarify, then, the spillover impact, the multiplier effect of clustering, etc., having growing companies in Newcastle or Gateshead, those kind of additionalities, they're not part of your targets in terms of looking to measure those impacts.
I think we will be looking to. I would hope that across the wider UKRI, we'd be able to have the ability to then be able to do that research to basically bring in those metrics.
It's very interesting. Can I just ask on that point of impact? As you look back at Innovate in the last few years, what's the best example or examples of something where Innovate made an intervention without which the company wouldn't have succeeded, and it's gone on to be a real success story? Because a lot of people say Innovate just drips money into companies that are struggling, and a lot of successful companies never go near Innovate. And can you help reassure people that it has done some really good things?
I would say that in terms of the companies that I know and that did have dramatic sort of like sliding doors moments, it was a sliding door moment for my company, I would say, like Metail back in the day. Also, it was a sliding doors moment for LV in terms of getting that first initial Innovate UK grant that it did get for Femtech. It wouldn't have existed. I also know several other businesses in drone businesses. Flylogics wouldn't have existed if it hadn't been for Innovate UK money. So that sense of that kick-off part and that proof point and that sense of the almost like that signalling element, and again, this is me from a decade ago, was valuable, and it did drive a cohort of companies going forward. And when I do talk to other founders, they do have very fond memories, and Innovate UK is dear to their heart because they felt it was a key moment for them in terms of their business. I think the difficult thing now, and I think you are right, is that there is a sense of like going through Innovate UK is just one of those rites of passage, and everybody applies for a grant, and it's lost a bit of that sense of like novelty and focus. Right. Okay. What is the novelty in the innovation that we're trying to do here?
Thank you. I think we'll move on now to Alison.
I just, in the interest of time, I had 3 questions, but I'm just going to jump to my latter 2, looking at the innovation ecosystem. Now, you refer to yourself as a startup guy, and so this made me think about SMEs, and we know that they can find it very challenging if competition-led investment applications can really put them off. So how will you ensure that Innovate UK is accessible and inclusive to SMEs?
I think inclusion and accessibility is a key part of what I've been working on for the last 5 years in different areas with Extend Ventures and other things. I think a key element is awareness and the ability for the application process to be clear and not to be something which you need a grant application company to do for you to get through. So where there's essentially a tax layer on doing the work. I think if I can reduce that part of the ecosystem during this process, then hopefully that will be a sign that there's been some success there. I think there is an element of, with SMEs, with any business, you are spending 100% of your time keeping a business alive and keeping it going. There needs to be an honesty around the process, the time that needs to be taken, a sense of clarity on actually, if you do undertake this process, then and you deliver against these core items, you have as good a chance of success as anyone else. I think that needs to be clear, and I think that work is in the sort of funnel of the process. So I think at each stage where we're basically choosing, that needs to be, we need to be choosing the best companies. You have to hit the criteria. 1% fail is a fail, but we have to be good at ensuring that the funnel is open and that people who could qualify make sure that they do select themselves to undertake the process. I know that when we were looking during COVID at COVID loans, when I was doing some process on that, there were a huge number of companies that just self-select themselves out of the process because they just are convinced that they would never ever succeed. And I think when we did work for Innovate UK on who are the innovators, there's a huge skew of male to female, right? So it's like 78% versus 22%.
Links to my next question. I'm really glad you brought that huge skew. I mean, we've said there's about 6 times more male founders get investment than females. We know that if we can redress that balance, we can generate about 250 billion for the economy. Now, last year, you may be aware that the Female Founders Award was meant to give out 50 awards, only 25 were allocated. I'm not 100% sure at the moment whether that's been redressed, but it was a clear sign of the culture which you commented on, and prioritisation that where if there was money saving, that's where it came from. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. So and reading through your application, it doesn't spring out to me a focus on trying to redress that imbalance. So how will you support groups that are underrepresented in innovation, such as female founders?
So, as I mentioned, the project to understand the different intersectionalities in terms of who gets money from Innovate UK and who doesn't, my organisation did that work in conjunction with Innovation Caucus. So to highlight ethnicity, gender and educational attainment. Our big push in terms of highlighting the numbers is that once you have the numbers, you can only change what you measure and understand the interventions that are required. Now, I've also been a judge on the Women in Innovation Awards. I was a judge for the 2020 cohort. And as a judge, the process of applying is exactly the same application process as applying for a grant. It felt like a process that wasn't fit for purpose to me, and an award process that was shoehorned into an existing system. So the two things were not balanced. So I would say that there are ways again of doing that process and engaging with the funnel, which are different type of intervention, which should have a more positive effect. And I think from my perspective, as someone who I believe has a good network in the community, who has spoken on a lot of these issues in the past, I've been out front and centre in talking about Elvie, which I was a board member of, which is only one of 60 female-founded businesses to generate revenue of over 50 million a year in the UK ever. So it is very clear front and centre to me that opportunity is not equally distributed, and there are things that need to be done to address that and address the funnel and make sure that people believe that they have the opportunity that if they hit the certain targets that they can gain success. Now, I think this needs more comms, it needs more clarity of purpose and mission, it needs more engagement in the community. I think Innovate UK, for me, has tended to be a little bit of a faceless organisation in the background, and if it can be much more out in the community, having stronger engagement, then I think some of these issues can be resolved.
Good. And it's not just about the gender of founders, obviously, and I will also mention disabled people and disabled tech because that often gets forgotten, but it's also about the topic areas that you focus on and those priority issues as well, can have a slightly gendered or less inclusive manner. So even if it's a male founder, the topic that they're looking at might be really important. So it's getting that balance right. With those things that you've just mentioned, and I'll jump back to my previous question that I left out, and you mentioned performance metrics earlier on about how you can manage those criteria and the economic impact. So how effective for transparency, because I'm trying to get an answer out of Innovate UK about why they only funded 25 was challenging. How would effective transparency for Innovate UK look like? And you talked about evidence-based and focused institutions. So I'm looking at those evidence and what data from the sector would you need to be able to access now so that you can demonstrate that performance and that transparency.
I think, again, it's being about as upfront as possible about how it goes through its process, how budgets are made, how they're allocated, and so on. So I think for a lot of the competitions, like, in general, if competitions have weak take-up, and therefore, let's say it's an 8 million competition, and there's weak take-up, so only 4 million is allocated, there's two ways of looking at that. There's one way which is actually that area was a misallocation of the number for the competition in the first place, and actually it should have been a 4 million competition. It's not that 4 million was taken away, it's just there weren't enough companies to deliver on that. So the transparency needs to be upfront in terms of, like, this is how we think about competitions, this is how we allocate money, so that there's no expectation gap. It hasn't been that we've taken money away. I'm not talking about the women in tech allocation there, but it's not about money that's taken away, it's about there weren't enough companies to fulfill that competition, so why weren't there? The right intervention then is about what was wrong with the funnel part of the process, that we didn't get enough businesses into that space. Is it that space doesn't have enough founders? Is it that we haven't looked in the right places? Is it that our outreach hasn't reached the right communities to make them aware? But I think that signal is there in the fact
also
that you didn't
your
achieve it.
criteria for that grant application might have been wrong and misfocused, and this is where you have to deal with, as you said, work with communities to know what criteria you should be setting that would work for these companies.
Yeah, and that has to be a feedback loop.
Yeah.
That has to be, like, fed back again of, like, this is why this didn't happen, and this is how it's going back into the next version of this scheme. So I think especially with things like social media, everything becomes a battleground, whereas actually often just need to meet in the middle and have a conversation and basically express why things are happening. And the more that I think people can see the machinery and how things are going on, I think the more that heat can be taken out, and actually the information and the data and the metrics going around to improve the system can be seen, and people can see that it's part of a journey, right? It's not a one-shot game.
Thank you very much, Alison. And just following on from that point, the point Alison was making, she highlighted some of the challenges in getting data out or information out of Innovate UK. And as part of the preparation for this meeting, we looked at we tried to find the accounts for Innovate UK. They are sort of there somewhere mixed up in UKRI's report publication, but it's not separated out in any clear way. Equally, UKRI's gender pay gap was recently shown to have broadened slightly by 0.7% over percentage points over the last year. So in terms of transparency, can you commit to a more transparent and accessible, in terms of innovation, in terms of data, Innovate UK, perhaps a separate set of accounts and reporting?
I would love that. So it's also been a challenge for my part of the process of trying to understand and prepare myself of, like, getting the data that I would expect to know before starting. So I think once I get these things, I want to make sure, and I aim to make sure that they are and become a norm.
Fantastic, great. John.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your answers. And I just want to end on a bit of sort of future looking. What do you see as the biggest challenge for Innovate UK during your term, if you're appointed? Is it going to be financial? Is it going to be structural? What do you see as the big challenges that you're going to face?
I think the big challenge is going to be getting the momentum for change and, like, shifting the organisation into a cadence and a sense of urgency and a company-focused, outcome-focused organisation. That structural move is going to be difficult, and I think that is going to be the key to success. Like how quickly can that move? But again, as I said, I've only ever met passionate people in the organisation who are desperate for the organisation to deliver a better ecosystem for the country. And I think at the moment there's that disconnect between the passion being there and the ambition, and the structure like strangling the ambition out of possibility. So it's like how can they be unleashed? And as I mentioned at the beginning, I see my role as set the strategy and vision, and then get the obstacles out of the way for people to deliver. I think if we can do that, I'm an optimist. That's why I'm a startup guy, and hence I believe that actually in moments of chaos there's big opportunity. And I think at a global level now is a real opportunity for the UK to position itself and set itself in a way that probably wasn't there a while ago. So the geopolitical context gives us a real opportunity to think about those national champions that we mentioned, and really think about how we set the UK up for the next phase of the global economy.
Right, thank you. Just thinking about in terms of challenges, we have the spending review coming up. There's obviously lots of purpose, lots of excitement in terms of this. You'll have lots of ideas. That could come up against a cold, hard reality of a very difficult, financial. Public servants are often asked to deliver more for less. Are you ready for that challenge if that comes over the course of your term?
Yes, I'm here to deliver. Like, we have to deliver within the envelope we're given. And as an innovator, it's always about how can you deliver stuff better, cheaper, faster. I think actually it's an obligation to do so. So that part is like how can we do that? How can we deliver more? How can we do it faster? How can we do it cheaper? How can we do it better?
You don't think you'll get sort of frustrated within those constraints that might sort of
I think my whole career I've been frustrated because I've always wanted to do things quicker than they can potentially be allowed. But I think that's a key part of trying to move things forward and generate progress. You should never not be frustrated. You should always be wanting to achieve more than currently is being achieved. There needs to be that sense of urgency. There needs to be that sense of drive. And I think if I didn't have that overarching view of we should be able to do better, I wouldn't be sat here today.
Great. Okay, and here's your chance to define the next set of questions. Well, perhaps not the next set of questions we give you, but if you come back to the committee at the end of your term, what would success look like for you?
I think at the end of the term, there'd be the clarity of the impact the organisation is delivering and that it's delivering more. And I'd be sat here with you all wondering how to give more money to the organisation.
Excellent, very good challenge. Thank you very much, John. We've got a few more moments, and I think there's a couple more questions for you, Tom. And thanks so much for your answers so far. George, would you like to?
Thank you. I really wanted to ask about the job and the structure. So Innovate, as we know, it's a sort of an arm of UKRI. You're called an interim, an executive chair, which means you're in the UKRI structure. There's a network of chairs of the Research Council, so you have a seat at that table. Innovate, as we all know, does also a huge amount of work with other departments. Internally, I think it's been structured as a matrix, so with some verticals, agriculture, healthy living, food, net zero, digital, and then some horizontals, place, ecosystem, led by Dave and Dean and Gary and the team I used to come and meet. Is your job, do you see yourself really as the chair of Innovate UK, sitting on the board of UKRI, or are you the CEO in terms of sort of tech company parlance that you and I understand? Are you the guy driving Innovate, or are you the chair giving the permission? I'm interested in where you sit in that clutch plate of bureaucracies.
I care about ensuring that an organisation is effective and has the right culture. So I would say that I'm closer to a CEO than in that.
At the moment, I think Guy is CEO. So then my next question is, have you had a chance to sit down and meet the senior leadership team and talk through with them how you want to change things?
All of them not yet. So I've been having some conversations with Stella, the interim, at the moment, and we're due to have a sit down tomorrow. But I wanted to make sure I did that in the right way. So have the conversation, sit down with them, and also I didn't want to prejudge this meeting. So
interesting moment. Government's about to launch industrial strategy. We've got missions. We've got big technology focus. We've got. Do you see the next few months, as all of this rolls out, quite radically changing the way Innovate internally is structured? An exciting moment of change, or do you see that actually Innovate is well structured at the moment? It just needs to plug in with your leadership and pick up those missions.
So, how I want to do things over the next 3 months. So, Ian will be starting in August. So my view is that I want to spend the first month getting under the skin of the organisation, meeting, going to see all the catapults, meeting as many people as I can to really understand the culture and how it's operating. Because again, it's quite difficult to see this stuff from the outside. And I naturally have views in terms of structure, but I don't want to prejudge. I want to understand how people operate today. And also from my experience, you can have your views on perfect structure, but actually when they meet people, they often fall apart. So structure and people have to work. So you have to tweak them and so on to make them work with people. Then month 2, my view is then about basically clarifying and simplifying purpose and messaging and alignment. And then month 3 would be, right, okay, this is the structure to deliver on that purpose, and then essentially be ready to present that August. So whilst all the other stuff's happening in the background. So that's how I'm thinking about my first 100 days, if you like.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Chair, perhaps we can have, assuming your appointment goes through, have you back in 3 months to hear your take, because that's quite an exciting moment, isn't it? Your first 3 months as you set out your vision.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, well, we'll certainly look at that. And Tom, that's it's great to hear your vision and you've your plans for the first 100 days. Building on what George was saying about the structure, so you are the executive chair of Innovate UK, and you'll be sitting around the table with all the other executive chairs of the research councils. Just Lord Valence, when he came before the committee, had a view of primary research or curiosity research as being sort of a very different bucket, and as being not, I think his quote was, it will happen where it happens, not sort of place-based, from research, from development, and again from innovation. I wonder what you see as the relationship between primary research and your role, your very clear vision around Innovate UK. What's the interface there? Do you see one?
I think we should have a close relationship in understanding what is happening in the primary research field, right? So what are the exciting things coming through where potentially the UK could have an edge? So if I think about when I came up with Metail, that was from going to visit a professor at Cambridge, seeing his primary research and going from photos to 3D accurate representation using computer vision. So I was like, wow, this is interesting. And then me as the innovator was like, oh, I can take that and apply it to this. So I think at the moment, I have thought that we don't do as good a job as we could do in terms of showcasing and communicating exciting primary research as it comes through for innovators to be able to go, that's interesting, right. Let's do something with that. So I think that interface is pretty important to know how stuff comes through, but I think it needs to be, again, run in the right way, fast, quick, effective, not slow. You might see in sort of academic type institutions. So that sense of like how to facilitate that relationship, how to see primary research and get it out as quickly as possible, I think is a key part of my relationship with the research houses.
Thank you very much, Tom. And you've certainly made an impression on us of somebody who, with your entrepreneurial background, has a bias to action and to speed. And it's clear that you're aware of some of the challenges of moving into a public sector organisation. I would say that my background, as many people around the committee, in the private sector, nothing quite prepared me for moving into the public sector, first working for a regulator and then as a member of Parliament. I wonder if your predecessor, Indra Mukherjee, has given you any advice on this or other parts?
He hasn't directly yet, so he did send me a note to congratulate me. So, but I have been going around talking to people I know who've made a similar leap about their experiences and what they've done. So I've done that, spoken to Laura Citron at London and Partners, having made the move from the ad world into working for, again, a similar arm's length body. I'm hoping to go and have a conversation with Paul Bate at the UK Space Agency, again, similar. So I want to make sure I have these conversations and learn as much as I can. So my view in life is, work smarter, not harder, and learn from other people. Don't reinvent the wheel. So I'm open to as many of those conversations as possible. So if there are people that you would recommend me speaking to, I would greatly receive them.
Thank you very much, Tom Adeyoola. Thank you very much for your openness. Thank you very much for the way in which you've answered our questions. We very much appreciated your time, and we very much appreciated this opportunity to share with you your vision of your role as Executive Chair of Innovate UK. Order.
Thank you very much.